Okay, good morning. Welcome to Biology 1A. My name is Mike Meehan. I'm the academic coordinator for this class. I've been the coordinator for about 20 years now. I'll be the person lecturing in Biology 1A-L. There are no labs and discussion this week. Again, no labs and discussion this week. Labs and discussion begin next week. You must attend your assigned discussion or lab section or you will be dropped. All right? We are completely full. So if you're not there, we're going to make that spot available for the 100 people we have on the wait list, okay? So if for some reason you can't make it to your discussion or your lab section, you must email me so that I can figure out what's going on so we save that spot for you. All right? Now, some of you are still trying to add the class. We've been dealing with all that through our website and an email address, bio1a-enrollment@berkeley.edu. You're probably already aware of that if you've been trying to add. If you're trying to switch sections, we have a form. That form needs to be filled out Friday. It's on our website. You need to fill that out by Friday. We'll try to switch you if we can. The dilemma is, let's say you're in a Tuesday night lab and you want Wednesday morning. The only way we can move you to Wednesday morning for that lab is if the Wednesday morning person wants out and wants Tuesday night, or we go through various combinations thereof and find room spots to move people around. That's the problem when everything's full. The same is true for discussions as well. For example, Tuesday 2 to 3, 3 to 4, not very popular times. The other times are more popular. Clearly, students would like to switch discussion sections, labs. We'll do it if we can. All right, but you need to fill that form out by Friday. All right, any questions about that? Yes. It's going to be on our website, mcb.berkeley.edu, courses/bio1a. You should have gotten that through BSpace. So please check the BSpace website for both Bio1A and Bio1A-L. I also sent you the syllabus last night. How many of you got the syllabus? Okay, yeah. If you're enrolled, you should have gotten the syllabus through BSpace. Okay. Make sure you're checking the email address you have on CalNet. That's the one we're going to use. That's the one that it's automatically sent to. So if you're checking Gmail, but your CalNet is berkeley.edu, you're not going to be getting those emails, okay? So a few announcements in terms of grades. Students always want to know how grades are done. There are going to be 3 exams in the class. Exam 1, which is worth 100 points. That's on February 22nd. Dr. Doudna will be giving the first series of lectures. She will be talking about biochemistry, cell biology, energetics, metabolism. Dr. Ryan will teach the second part of the course. That will be covering genetics, molecular genetics, classical genetics. That's covered on the second exam, also worth 100 points on Friday, April 2nd. These exams are held 8 to 9 during the morning. 8 to 9 during the morning. You will get exam handouts when it comes time for those exams. Those exams, as I mentioned, are worth 100 points. They're all multiple choice. And they're going to be in various rooms around the campus depending upon your discussion section. Okay? So those will be the first 2 exams. The final, which is a comprehensive exam, will cover all 3 parts, including the third part, which will be taught by Dr. Firestone. Dr. Firestone will discuss physiology, in particular human physiology, reproduction, development, nervous systems, immune systems, things like that. That will be the third part of the course. That final will be on May 10th, which is a Monday, 8 to 11. It's worth 300 points, 166 points from the third part, 67 from each of the first 2 parts. So at the end of the course, there's 500 points. We'll figure out a histogram. I'll meet with the faculty. We'll determine the cutoffs. Then that's basically what happens. Now, if students are awfully close to that cutoff, within 1 or 2 points, we will discuss each student in that situation, whether or not to bump them to the higher grade. And to do that, I'll look at 2 things. One is, we'll look to see how you did on the final. Did you show improvement on the final relative to these 2 exams? If so, that should be used as consideration to bump you, because after all, the final is comprehensive. If you didn't show improvement on the final, we're not going to consider you for a bump. The second aspect of that bump is directly input from the GSI. Did you come to discussion? All right? Did you participate? Did you help out? Things like that, okay? So those are the 2 criteria that will be used for those bumps. Now, I don't know ahead of time, nor do you know, if you will be a bump, right? We'll know that at the end, and there will be probably about 75 to 100 students who are oh so close, within 1 or 2 points for that consideration. First thing we'll use is, of course, that z-score, showing improvement, and then GSI input. So any questions about grading on this? All right, we've given out typical grades for like the last 20 years, the GPAs within plus or minus 0.02. Every semester we'll use similar criteria this time, okay? Again, discussions and labs begin next week. You must attend your assigned discussion and your assigned lab. If not, we're going to basically figure that spot's available for another student. If you're trying to switch, go to our website. Information's available there. All right, any questions? Okay, like I say, I've been doing the course in terms of the academic coordinating the class and the Bio 1A lecture class for almost 20 years now. I really enjoy it. The thing I enjoy most is not giving the lectures. They're okay. But the thing I enjoy most is you coming to office hours. So I have office hours scheduled. They're Monday 11 to 12, I believe, and Wednesday 1 to 2. It's on the syllabus. Please, please come to office hours. In terms of doing well in this course, probably the most important thing to do is to stay on top of the material. Do not plan to cram for the first exam on the 21st of February. It's going to be extremely difficult to do, so do not fall behind. That's the most important thing you can do. Come to discussion. It will help you, all right? We have lots and lots of resources for you. One resource will be the textbook. The textbook that we're using is written by Campbell, either the 8th or 7th edition. I've managed to get a very good discount at the bookstore. And if you go to B-Space, there's a 10% off discount coupon, which drops the price down even further. That coupon's good certainly today and tomorrow, I think. And Ned's did not give me an expiration date for it. So if you have the 7th edition, you do not need to buy the 8th. We've cross-referenced both the 7th and 8th edition. If you have the 6th edition, you should get a different book. And if you're going to buy a book, you might as well buy the 8th edition, the newer book. Now, there was a note up here on the board earlier that this Berkeley thing was selling the book for $65. They had no idea what book it was. They said it's a biology book. So that's why I erased it. You should be using the Campbell book. If you have a different book, Raven and Johnson, SADA, etc., it's going to be difficult because we're not going to cross-reference those readings, and we're going to be using the Campbell book. So any questions about the textbook per se? I know it's expensive. You can try to share. The advantage of buying the 8th edition, new, is it includes the ebook, so you have it electronic. You can underline it. You can highlight it. You can do various things like that. In fact, as instructors, we can add specific comments to that book. We can change the text in places. We can say, oh, this is all wrong here, and we can correct it. So the ebook is very useful. There's also access to Mastering Biology, which has lots of animations, tutorials, quizzes, various resources like that. So as I mentioned, there are lots of resources for you directly associated with the course, office hours, my office hours, the faculty office hours, and the GSIs will hold office hours 10 to 2, Monday through Friday in the GSI office, which is 2084. It's all outlined on the syllabus. But we're here to try to help you. There's an exam reader available at Replica Copy. I will post it on B-Space shortly. The exam reader has representative exams from past semesters. Now, Dr. Downa has not taught this part of the course, so what I've done is put 2 exams from previous semesters that will at least give you something to work from. Dr. Ryan has taught the course multiple times. I have 2 of his old exams in the exam reader. Very useful to look at, and there's one final exam in there as well to give you sample questions. Use the exam reader as though you'd take the exam. Set aside 50 minutes to take the lecture exams, and then score it. There's answer keys with it. All right? So use the resources wisely. Come to office hours. Use tutorials, various things like that. We're here to try to help you. There is email. I'm going to warn you, if you send an email 2 days before the exam and say, I don't understand genetics, could you go over it via email? We're not going to respond. Last semester, I had a student send out an email at midnight before the exam, which is 8 in the morning, 146 questions. I didn't answer 146 questions, but I did say about 140 of these could be answered by you if you strictly went to the index and found the page number that corresponded to the reading. Okay? So when you send a question, first take the effort to try to find out the answer, and if you can't, then come to office hours, send us the email. If it's easy to answer via email, we will do it. But if it's going to take 5 pages, then we're going to suggest you come to office hours. All right? Again, we're here to help you. It's a hard course. It's a challenging course. At the end of the semester, you will have learned a lot. Even if you're not happy with your grade, you will still have learned a lot, okay? So it's not all about the grades, okay? So I mentioned that because every semester when we give grades, we get a fair number of emails from students thinking, I thought I deserved a B because I came to every lecture. It's not the basis. The basis for the grades will be strictly looking at your points, discussing bumps, all right? It's not what you need, it's what you earned, all right? Any questions? All right, enjoy the course, and I'll see you Monday night.
Good morning. So my name is Jennifer Doudna. Can you hear me in the back? Yes? Yeah? And I'm a professor in molecular cell biology. I'm a biochemist. And I'm going to be lecturing for the next 5 weeks on basically some of the biochemical fundamentals of biology. So I wanted to start off by just telling you a little bit about my style and the way that I'll be running my section of the course. Many of you probably know that hopefully you got the B-Space announcement yesterday indicating that I had posted the lecture notes for today and Friday. How many people were able to print those out? Okay, it looks like most people. So my recommendation to you would be that you do that before coming to class each time so that you have a copy of the slides that I will be showing. And that way you don't have to scribble down things that are on the slides directly. You can just take notes on what I'm saying. And secondly, this is a big book, right? So there's a lot of material here. As Mike said, this is a course that covers a lot of ground. And so I would like to be your guide through this material. And so what I'll be doing is mostly putting on the slides figures from the book, sometimes other things that I think help enhance the understanding, but I'll really try to guide you through this material. So when you go to study, what I want you to do, please, is to first of all use the lecture and the lecture notes as your guide through that material, but please read the book because there's a lot of great stuff in there. And really, it puts a lot of the material that we'll be talking about in class into a very much broader context. However, when you go to study for the exams, what I want you to be responsible for is the material that I show or discuss in class. Okay? It's really difficult to expect you to know everything in this book that is in the readings. And so I want you to, when you study, please focus on the notes and the material that we discussed in class. Okay, so any questions about that? This is a big class. I've taught this before, but not for a few years. And I recall that in the past, we actually did have the ability, at least in a little bit in class, to have some interaction. So I would encourage you, if something that I'm saying just isn't making sense, it probably isn't making sense to a lot of other people as well. So please do raise your hand, and I will try to clarify what we're talking about. Okay, but obviously it's difficult in a class like this to answer everybody's questions during class. We really can't do that. So I do hold office hours, and I decided to initially schedule office hours Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 to 10. So it'll be right after class Wednesday and Friday, and then also on Tuesday, 9 to 10 in my office, which is in 708A Stanley Hall, just across the way. So you can just follow me back after class if you want to come to office hours Wednesday or Friday, and then also on Tuesday. I'm going to see how attendance goes at those office hours, and I'll probably end up eliminating one of those. So we'll have 2 office hours a week that you can come by and talk to me. And then also use email if you need to, but I want to just give you a heads up warning that I'm somebody that gets probably 200 emails a day already. So you can't necessarily trust that you'll get a fast answer on email. Questions about that? Okay, great. So I want to just, today we're really going to just discuss a little bit about the material that's in the introductory chapters of Campbell. And it's important to know that that, that in this course we expect you to have a certain basic understanding of chemistry, because as we go through the material, especially in my section of the course, but really also in Professor Ryan and Professor Firestone's sections, you really have to understand some of the basics of chemical behavior of molecules so that you can, so that this makes sense, right? So we expect that you will have a basic understanding of chemistry, and if you read chapters 2 and 3 in the Campbell book, they really give you a refresher on that. So if you feel like you really need that refresher, please do look at that material. And what I want to do today is just talk a little bit about the levels of biological organization, a little bit about the chemistry of life, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the properties of water that are so critical in biology. So one of the things that I think is really fascinating and has certainly always interested me in biology is the connection to evolution. So I think that what you'll find, especially as you go through the Campbell book and certainly as we go through the material in this section of the course, will be, the underlying theme really is how biology involves evolution. And I have a couple of points up here that I wanted to make. So evolution is the process of change that has really transformed living things on the planet. Biology itself is the scientific study of life. And you probably know that biology is an incredibly broad subject. So somebody like me is a biologist who studies molecules and how molecules function. But a biologist can also be somebody who studies trees and forests. They can be somebody who studies insects. They can be somebody who studies the way that networks of molecules interact in cells. So it's very, very, very broad topic. Biologists are scientists who ask questions such as, how does a single cell develop into an entire organism? Right? That's a field called developmental biology. We can ask, how does the human brain function? Incredibly interesting and complex question. You'll hear more about that in the third part of this course. How do living things interact in communities, like communities of ants or bees or humans, right? So these are all different kinds of questions that biologists can try to address scientifically. And as I mentioned, I think that evolution is really the overarching theme in biology, and really all aspects of biology. We really are always going back to the fact that organisms are related to each other. Molecules that are found in living systems are related to each other. And one of the things that's been incredibly exciting in the field of certainly of molecular and organismal biology, and even sort of branching out into anthropology in the last decade or so, is the fact that we now have access to genomic sequence data for many, many different organisms, including us. And what that has made it possible to do is to really see how evolution has worked on genomes, right, at the DNA level, and how genomes are related among different kinds of organisms. And it's taken the whole way that we look at life and its interconnectivity to a completely different level. So one of the things that I wanted to just mention, because I watched a fascinating series from Nova over the holidays that you can actually download from iTunes called Becoming Human. And this is I'm just putting it up here. It's not directly related to the course. It's just for fun, but it was incredibly interesting. And my 7-year-old son, who doesn't know much at all about biology right now, was just absolutely enthralled, as was I. It was really incredibly interesting. And so that would be a series that I would highly recommend to any of you that are interested in the sort of the intersection of biology and anthropology. Okay, so there's clearly a biological hierarchy. Your book talks about this, and this is a figure taken from the book that just shows how we can divide the field of biology and biology itself into different levels of organization. So on this side, we can start off with, at the smallest end, atoms that form molecules, and we'll be talking a lot about molecules in this section of the course. Molecules are, of course, critical to form the organelles and cells that end up making up various tissues that come together and create organs and whole organisms over here. And then, of course, those organisms are interacting with each other and with other kinds of organisms to make up communities and eventually the whole biosphere, right? So I think it's just useful to every now and then just sort of step back and sort of think about all these different levels of organization in biology. So your book defines a term they call emergent properties. And this is basically meant to indicate the features or behavioral properties, the appearance of an organism that results from the interaction of the parts within that system. And as biologists, and especially really as molecular biologists, but really this is true, I think, in any field of biology, we have to break things down into units that we can actually study, right? So as molecular biologists, we study individual molecules, and we're aware that those molecules are interacting with other molecules, and they're part of the whole organization of a cell, which is part of the whole organization of an organism ultimately. But we have to be able to define a system that we can do experiments on. And so as molecular biologists, we focus on molecules, and we are aware that these are just parts of an entire system that create features and behaviors and properties that we can observe in an entire organism. And this is sort of an important point here, that emergent properties are also characterize inanimate objects, right? So we could think about a bicycle the same way. We can study the individual parts of a bicycle, but you wouldn't necessarily understand how a bicycle actually works just by looking at the parts list. And the same thing is true in biology, right? So as molecular biologists, we can understand individual molecules and behaviors of molecules. We don't necessarily understand how they all work together to create a cell or an organism, but we're working in that direction, right? And I just want to mention another term that you'll probably see, a word called systems biology. This is a field of biology in which people like me that are studying molecules and trying to understand how molecules behave are increasingly trying to really put that information in the context of a whole system. And so we know, obviously, that molecules are interacting, and increasingly we have a lot of information about networks of molecules that work in various pathways in cells. And so people that are really trying to do systems biology are interested in understanding the behavior of whole biological systems that might involve these large networks of interacting molecules. And so this is a field that there's a lot of excitement right now about trying to understand the system of biology that involves things like climate change. How does increasing the concentration of carbon dioxide alter the biosphere? And how does a drug for blood pressure affect other organs? So these are the kinds of questions that come up in systems biology that are very relevant to atmospheric chemistry and to medicine. Okay, now chapter 2 in your book really goes over the chemical foundations of life. And like I said, we assume that you have a basic understanding of chemical behavior from general chemistry for this course. And there's just a few things that I want to point out. So biology is a multidisciplinary science. So that means that as biologists, we have to know something about chemistry. We often have to know something about geology. We also have to know something about anthropology, depending on the field we're working in, right? So we might have to know something about atmospheric chemistry. So it's a multidisciplinary science. And secondly, living organisms are subject to the basic laws of both physics and chemistry. So we have to know those basic laws to be able to understand biological behavior. Organisms are composed of matter, and matter is anything that takes up space and has mass, right? So we have to, again, especially as a molecular biologist, we have to think about atoms and molecules and how those atoms and molecules behave in a living system. So matter is made up of elements. What is an element? An element is a substance that can't be broken down into any other substances by chemical reactions, right? So if you look at the periodic table, this is a table of the elements, right? And a compound is a substance that consists of two or more elements that have come together in some fixed ratio. So you can write a chemical formula that describes a molecule that includes all of the atoms that are found in that molecule. And this is very important. A compound has characteristics that are different from those of its component elements, right? So, you should be aware that a molecule can have could have just one type of atom in it, right? So, for example, oxygen. Is oxygen an element or a compound? Shout it out. Element, right? Right. Even though it's O2, right? It's an element. And what about iron? Element. What about water? Compound. And carbon dioxide? Compound. Right. Okay. So, but it's important to know the difference between those two, because this will come up in some of the things that we'll be discussing. And this is just this is again a figure taken from your book that I think really illustrates the fact that you can have components. These are individual elements. Sodium, which is a solid over here. Chlorine, liquid over here. These are elements. Both would not be things that you would want to eat, right? They would be not good for you. But if they come together to form sodium chloride, this is now table salt. So this is something that we use every day. So the properties, the chemical properties and the interactions in biological systems of compounds compared to their component elements can be extremely different, like this example. Okay, and so in life there are about 25 of the 92 elements that are essential in life. And 4 of these, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, make up the vast majority of living systems, right? Over 95%. And so a lot of the molecules that we're going to be talking about, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, and carbohydrates that we'll be really talking about a lot next time, are molecules that have these 4 elements as their primary components, right? And so when you study organic chemistry, for example, we're studying molecules that typically have these 4 elements as their primary components. And most of the remaining 4% that takes us up to 100% are the elements calcium, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur. So think about it. That's really interesting, isn't it? That there really are only 8 elements that make up the vast majority of biological systems. And then last but not least, and this is actually really, really important, especially for things like human nutrition, there are trace elements that are required in low amounts, very low amounts sometimes, but if you don't have them, the organism can't live or is very, very defective or ill. And those trace elements are also really critical for certain kinds of behaviors of molecules. Typically, it's often enzymes that have to have the presence of a trace element to function normally. If you don't have that, it's a problem. This is also a table that's taken out of your book that shows the elements by their symbols from the periodic table. The name of the element here, its atomic number. Does anybody know what's atomic number? Okay, has to do with the number of electrons, right? Yep. And so the percentage of human body weight for each of these elements is shown over here. And you can see that for oxygen, wow, whopping 65%. That's a lot, right? So we're mostly oxygen. And then down here in the second part of this chart are some of these elements that are present in much lower quantities. Magnesium, for example, just 0.1%. Yet if we don't have magnesium in our diet, we're not going to be alive for very long, right? You have to have magnesium. It turns out magnesium is a critical element for the function of many enzymes. It's also critical for the way that nucleic acids like DNA and RNA are packaged in the cell and things like that, right? And we'll talk a lot more about that, but it's very important to be aware of this. Something that I think is really interesting, so these are elements that make up less than 0.01% of the human body weight. So these are, again, elements that are considered to be trace elements. And, you know, human nutrition is a field of biology that is still, amazingly, we don't know that much about it. And you probably, you might notice that, you know, you open up a news site like Yahoo News or Google News every now and then. Fairly frequently, you'll come across an article that has to do with some new study in human nutrition. Often, those studies have to do with the discovery of trace elements that turn out to be really important. And so, for example, there was a study not too long ago that showed that in certain areas of Asia, people that live in these areas get a much higher concentration of selenium in their diet than the typical Western diet includes. And those people seem to be particularly resistant to certain kinds of cancer as well. And so there have been now a number of studies that have tried to correlate the presence of this trace element, selenium, which again is, you know, not present in very high amounts in the human body and yet appears to be important somehow in regulating cell growth. So I think this is a very interesting and active area of biological research where potentially, you know, understanding molecular biology will have a really big and important impact. If there are deficiencies in essential elements, we can often observe phenotypes that are associated with those. And so I wanted to just show you again, this is a picture taken from the book. And on the left-hand panel is a picture of plants that are being grown. These are corn plants that are being grown in different types of soils where they have either on the left-hand side a very abundant, a soil that's very rich in nitrogen, and on the right-hand side a soil that is relatively nitrogen poor. And what you might notice if you look carefully at this picture is that the plants growing in nitrogen-rich soil are bigger, they're greener, right? They look like very healthy corn plants, whereas these plants over here are quite a bit shorter. They look not as dark green. They sort of start taking on a yellowish look. And so we know that those plants are deficient in something, and that deficiency in this case is nitrogen. And you know that nitrogen, from what we just talked about, is one of the critical 4 elements, right? So if plants don't have enough nitrogen, they get unhappy really fast, right? And why is that? Well, because they can't make a lot of the molecules, the biomolecules that they require to, in this case, to do photosynthesis, right? So they don't do well. On the right-hand side, this is an example of a disease that comes about if humans have a deficiency of a trace element, iodine. So iodine, again, is one of those elements that we don't need very much of it, but if we don't have enough, we get sick. And so it turns out that iodine is a critical component of a hormone called thyroid hormone. And your thyroid is located in your neck. And so when you don't have enough access to iodine, the body tries to make up for this by, the thyroid gland enlarges and it works harder and harder to try to scrap together enough iodine to make thyroid hormone. And so we get this kind of enlargement that you can actually see in this woman who has a really severe case of this disease called goiter. Okay, so this is just really emphasizing how incredibly important chemistry is in biology, and especially these kinds of trace elements that we don't always think about, but we have to have them. And then for the last few minutes, I just want to talk a little bit about water and how this is a molecule that is just incredibly important to life. So again, if you read the popular media, and every now and then, fairly frequently, it seems like there's an article that says maybe there was water once on Mars, maybe there was water on the moon, right? And so why is that so interesting? Does anybody know? Why do we care? If there's no water on the moon, is it likely that there was ever life there or could be? No, right? Why not? Does anybody know? Anybody know what percent of water the human body is, for example? It's like about 70% water, right? It's a lot of water. So, and that's true for most organisms. So water turns out to be really, really incredibly important for life. And in fact, if there weren't any water, there wouldn't be any life as we know it, at least, for a number of reasons. And I want to just talk a little bit about this. This is there's a chapter in the introductory chapter in your book that's devoted to this topic, and the reason is that it really is incredibly important in biology. So water is considered the biological medium on Earth, right? So again, going back to evolution, we think that life really evolved out of water, that if there hadn't been any water on the early Earth, there would never have been the ability to evolve living systems in the first place. All living organisms require water, and they require it more than any other substance, right? We have to have water. And cells are surrounded by water, and the cells themselves are 70 to sometimes up to 95% water, right? So these are, and you probably know the word aqueous, right? Does everybody know that word, aqueous? So cells are really in an aqueous environment, which means that they are in a water-filled environment. So all of the molecules that we're going to be talking about, the proteins, nucleic acids, the fats, they are all in an aqueous environment. They're surrounded by water, right? And the abundance of water is the main reason that the Earth is habitable. So if human beings want to take a mission to Mars and they want to try to colonize Mars, if there's no water there, it's going to be really hard to do that, right? This is what all of this information tells you. Okay, and so again, this is just a picture of the planet, and what you can see from this zoomed out view is that even the planet Earth is mostly water, right? There's a lot of water here. And this is what has made this a place where life could pretty readily evolve. And so it's probably worth saying a little bit about the chemical properties of water that has made it such an incredibly important medium in biology. And one of the things about water is that, so everybody knows the formula for water, right? What's the chemical formula for water? H2O. Okay, so if you just see that chemical formula, you know that there's one oxygen atom connected to two hydrogen atoms, right? So that's what that formula tells you. And there's several properties of this molecule that we should just be aware of and thinking about as we're talking about the rest of the material in this course. First of all, water is what's called a polar molecule. And that means that the opposite ends of this molecule have opposite charges. And I don't have a slide specifically showing this, but so we said the formula for water is H2O. And the water molecule is a molecule that actually looks like this. Right? So the O is here, and it's bonded to these two hydrogens, and they actually come off at an angle. They're not pointing in opposite directions, but they're actually coming off at an angle like this. And you remember that oxygen has an atomic number of 8, so we have these other electrons that are here, right? And so that means that this molecule tends to be polar because we tend to get an electronegativity to this end of the molecule and electropositivity to this end of the molecule, right? So we can maybe remember this from chemistry class, but you can write sort of a partial charge symbol like this, right? Where this end has sort of a partial positive charge, and this end has a partial negative charge, right? Did I do it the wrong way? I did it the wrong way. Thank you. Everybody's awake. Good. And so because of that, it means that these molecules will tend to interact with each other in very large chains, right? Because the negativity will tend to attract the positive end of another water molecule that will come in, and you can get these long networks of interactions. And the same can occur with macromolecules as well. So we'll be looking at a lot of pictures of of protein molecules and nucleic acid molecules in this course. And I won't typically show this explicitly, but I want you all to remember and be aware that these molecules, certainly when they're inside of a cell or anywhere, I mean, if we're working with them in a purified test tube system as well, they are surrounded by water molecules. And these molecules will organize themselves according to this polarity. And so that's an extremely important behavioral property of water that influences the behavior of all the molecules that make up the cell as well. Right, okay, and so this polarity then also allows water molecules to form hydrogen bonds with each other. And these hydrogen bonds are a special kind of chemical bond that is an interaction between, it's essentially a sort of a covalent-like bond that's an interaction between a hydrogen and another atom, typically oxygen, but not always. Okay, here's a sort of a better picture than my drawing, which shows you the orientation of the water molecule and the electronegativity that can build up between the oxygen and the hydrogen on another molecule. And so we can get this interaction going on. And these bonds, even though they're drawn here with these dotted lines, these can actually be incredibly strong bonds, right? And they can, and especially because they can, we typically have hydrogen bonds that are present in large numbers. They're present in large numbers in water, of course, which makes water behave the way it does. They're also present in large numbers in cells where there are macromolecules. So if we have a protein molecule, and we'll be talking more about this in later lectures, but these protein molecules have an incredibly large number of hydrogen bonds, it turns out, not only to other waters that might surround the protein molecule, but also within the protein molecule itself. And those hydrogen bonds often are one of the most important types of interactions that really stabilize the structure, the molecular structure of a protein. And the same is true in nucleic acids and also in other types of macromolecules like sugars as well. And so this picture just kind of shows you how these water molecules can organize themselves. And you can imagine that this is just showing you 5 individual water molecules, but they can actually, obviously, form these incredibly large networks that are all connected by hydrogen bonds. Okay, and so there really are 4 properties of water that contribute to the ability of the Earth to support the kind of life that exists here. And I want to just point these out to you. So they're shown here. One property is called cohesive behavior. And cohesive behavior really has to do with what you saw on the last slide. So because water molecules have this very distinctive geometry to them, and they interact in these using hydrogen bonds in these large networks, they are cohesive, right? And they're cohesive not only with each other, but also with other molecules that have the ability to form hydrogen bonds. And as we're going to see going through some of the material in the first part of the course at least, cells have had to evolve in this environment. So cells have created different kinds of mechanisms for dealing with water and interacting with water, and in some cases shielding parts of the cell from water. So you probably know that cells have a greasy kind of lipid membrane that surrounds them, and that membrane is incredibly important for keeping water out or in, right? It basically segregates all of the contents of the cell from the aqueous environment outside of the cell. And then cells have then had to evolve certain kinds of molecules that are channels in those membranes that allow ions and other kinds of molecules to go across that lipid membrane and get from one aqueous environment outside of the cell to the aqueous environment inside of the cell. So again, back to the idea of evolution, we know that a lot of the behaviors and properties that we observe right now for cells has to do with the fact that they have evolved in this aqueous environment and have had to deal with the presence of water. Okay, second property is the ability to moderate temperature. So water is incredibly important for shielding and helping to buffer extreme changes in temperature. That's important in organisms, of course, and it's also an important thing that happens environmentally. And so you probably know that the ocean and large lakes, large bodies of water, are known for buffering temperature changes that can occur coastally. This occurs in, say, the Great Lakes region of the United States. It occurs here in California with the cold ocean waters right off our coast. A lot of the behavior and the weather patterns that evolve have to do with water's ability to buffer changes in temperature. Okay, and then thirdly, water expands when it freezes. So you probably know this from, if you put a bottle of beer in the freezer to chill it down quickly and you forget about it, it's a problem, right? And it's a problem because that water in there just, when it freezes, it expands and maybe pops the top off or breaks the glass. And so that's a property that, again, is really important for the way that bodies of water will behave, and even water in our bodies or cells. And finally, water is an incredibly versatile solvent. So it's important for dissolving all sorts of salts, those trace elements that we discussed, making building blocks for macromolecules available in cells, so the nucleotide building blocks, the amino acid building blocks of proteins. These are all dissolved initially in water, right? And they're available to the enzymes in our cells because they are floating around and are accessible in this aqueous kind of environment. Okay, and just a couple more points. So collectively, hydrogen bonds are what hold these molecules together, and this is a property that your book refers to as cohesion. I don't usually use that word, but you'll see it in your book. Cohesion helps the transport of water against gravity in plants, for example, and your book has a nice discussion of how that works. And then there's another property they define called adhesion, which is an attraction between different kinds of substances, such as water and plant cells. And again, water is critical for these properties because of its ability to form hydrogen bonds, not only with itself, but also with other kinds of molecules. And then this is the last thing that I wanted to show you today, which is just to define several of the units and terms that we're going to be referring to in this course. So in science, we use the Celsius scale of temperature, right? And so you should be familiar with that. You know that on the Celsius scale, 0 is freezing, not 32 like in Fahrenheit, okay? Secondly, a calorie is the unit of heat that's required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. And something that's a bit confusing, the calories that we see on packages of food are actually kilocalories, where 1 kcal equals 1,000 calories. And then finally, this joule term is another term that we'll be using when we talk about energy, and its definition is right here. Okay, thank you very much. Stay dry. I'll see you on Friday.